one of the things that is like, it's not even really concerning, but it's interesting to me, is that when you look at like word and phrase what's being described when Bethesda and Xbox describe Starfield, I think it's a little bit different than people have started to just assume it is. Like we've already today gotten in chat a ton of questions. Do you really think that the Series X and the Series S can run this insanely huge game of Starfield? Do you really think the creation engine can keep it running with how much craziness they have here with 1,000 different planets and all this? And I'm like, well, yeah, I think the creation engine can run it. I think the Series S can run it. I'd like all of that can absolutely run it. And the reason I think that is because there are frankly other much bigger games. What's been described largely with Starfield is that it will use procedural tech that's pretty much generated when you drop on a planet and arrive there. It'll like populate out. So let me see if I can find the exact quote. Let's see. So I think this will have some of the quotations we need. Let's see. We've had a peek at some of the planets in the Starfield Direct, but what we don't know is how unique each of the 1,000 planets will feel when it comes to exploring the universe. In an interview with IGN, God Howard, said, quote, "We do a lot of procedural generation in Starfield, but I would keep in mind that we've always done that. It's a big part of Skyrim in terms of questing and some other things that we do. We generate landscapes using procedural systems, so we've always kind of worked on it." Yeah, I don't think it's anything that crazy new. The difference is like they would generate landscapes and then they would basically lock it in. So they generate it, lock it in, it's set. What it sounds like is going to be happening with Starfield is when you choose to land on a set location, that pretty much, in very simplistic terms, will generate a seed based on where you want to land on the planet. And then as you land on it, that load screen, it will generate procedurally that area of the planet for you. It doesn't sound like, and it's not been confirmed, that you're going to be able to like actually fly in one straight line and circumnavigate the planet. It doesn't sound like that happens. Maybe, not that you could fly anyways, but if you were to just walk, in a straight line, it doesn't sound like you'll be able to actually loop all the way around, because that's not how it's working. It's basically choosing a point on a sphere. That point determines, if we use our skull as an example, if this is our planet, you pick a point here, that creates a seed, and then it generates out a map, but it's a flat map that goes on maybe forever, who knows, but it just keeps going and going and going, and then you get in your ship, you fly away, and if you come back and you want to land over here, you can do that. That'll generate a new seed, and then it'll distribute. That might not be how it works. Maybe it is, in fact, a spherical object that you can explore, circumnavigate, whatever, and it's the same every single time you land, no matter where you are. You just pick a different point on the map, but they haven't described it that way. Yeah, Todd's a flat earther. Yeah, basically. That's what it sounds like in all the interviews, is that when you land, they generate procedurally the land that you'll land on. And then they generate where they're going to place points of interest. So it's not like they've generated all the planets in the map and then you can land and you have to find it. So like in guides, it doesn't sound like there's going to be, oh, this outpost is at this coordinate on this planet. It sounds like this outpost is in this area. If you land, it will generate and spawn somewhere in this vicinity, which is just different, okay? Because again, people hear 1,000 planets and they think, okay, 1,000 planets, and the planets are going to be like, they're established. But no, it sounds like they're generating them in real time when you land, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but again, it's just different. As I go on, let's see. I mean, that's the entire thing. That's all this article has on procedural generation. What else does this article have? Do they have anything? Let's see. The main benefit of Starfield's procedural generation is that it allows the game to be much larger than it would otherwise be possible. Even if each planet was only the size of Skyrim, making 1,000 of them would be well beyond what developers could do by hand, and Starfield's planets are many times larger than that. While it's unlikely that any single player will ever fully explore every planet, the fact that they theoretically could helps capture the sheer scale of the galaxy. Starfield's procedural generation also has the potential to create some unique and natural feeling environments. Of course, this will depend heavily on the algorithm Bethesda uses. Still, the technology has come a long way since BGS used the procedural generation for environments like Elder Scrolls Arena and the sequel Daggerfall. There are some beautiful and realistic looking examples of procedurally generated landscapes, and what Bethesda has shown off so far looks promising. Yeah, there's certainly some interesting like landscapes. Again, the question is like, you choose to land on a planet, you land here, this is before you, how do you make this fun? Like, that's the biggest question at the core of all of this, is just how do you take this and turn it into a video game that's fun? It could be that exploring every nook and cranny and just running from here over there is the fun. But remember, there are no rovers, there are no speeder bikes, there's no flying your spaceship over there. If you want to get over to this mountaintop, you have to walk on foot all the way over, climb up, and then stand there. And that's fine. You also have the jetpack, or as Todd calls it, the boost pack, which is just really funny to me that they're like, yeah, we don't have rovers, but you can just boost around. Boost around. Whatever. So it's just like with No Man's Sky. The question is, okay, you can do this. Cool. How is it fun? What's the hook here? I know you're going to be collecting materials. Frankly, 50 hours of collecting materials doesn't sound that fun to me. So like, what is the thing that will make this interesting? What they've said is that then they will also be able to generate outposts at specific points. So it could be that they generate an outpost here, and then they also throw an outpost behind this mountain that you'll find when you go and explore back there. That could be cool. That could keep things interesting. But all of this is still very, very mysterious. We don't really know how a lot of this works. The fear of planets being boring and repetitive, I think boring is the main concern, which is a very valid concern. In fact, this is where arguments regarding No Man's Sky work in reverse. The game might be good now, but it faced criticisms at launch for repetitive planets. Yeah. Starfield may now face a similar problem. It's technically possible that a player can land on 10 points on a planet's surface and find 10 wholly unique locations. Rather, it seems just as likely that they will find 10 variations of the same gray rocks. Bethesda has done very little to allay this concern, as it seems like most or all of Starfield's planets have a single environment each. This arguably makes sense, since 1 square mile of Martian wasteland doesn't look that different from any other. Yeah. And it might be accurate to what would be the case if you were to land on an alien planet, like, or a foreign planet. That makes sense. But it doesn't make it fun. Like, we can look at this and say, yeah, no, but it's realistic. There's no human life. There's no civilization on this planet except for like outposts. So of course it's just going to be a big barren wasteland with like repeated mountains and valleys and trees and stuff for you to find, maybe an ocean or two. That's true. That's realistic, I suppose, but that doesn't mean it's fun. Those are two separate questions that are kind of independent of each other. The question from a game design standpoint, not a simulation standpoint, from a game design standpoint, is how do you make something like that fun? And that's where Todd Howard's magic has to come in here. He has to find a way to make it fun. Real planets will still have landmarks and terrain features that stand out as unique, and it's hard to imagine that Starfield's algorithm creating Olympus, Mons. Yeah, alternatively, if the algorithm can make landmarks, or if developers design something manually, it begs the question of why players would want to go anywhere else. Dungeons and encounter design are another problem with Starfield's procedural generation that it faces. A good combat encounter is more than just showing or throwing enemies at the player and telling them to go nuts. Bethesda knows this, and its games have plenty of well-designed combat encounters. Since Starfield's random encounters will also be procedurally generated, it may face problems of repetition or illogical design. More than anything, I would expect a lot of these encounters will look like, oh, there's like a beast over here, a big alien you can fight. Or, oh, the encampment that I'm going to is up here on the hill, so I need to run up there, and then it's like a copy and pasted outpost with enemies inside that are also copy and pasted. So then you run through and explore it from there, which could also be fine, but it certainly would get really repetitive I can't imagine it wouldn't. The same applies to Starfield's equivalent dungeons. Fallout 4 was pretty good at making its dungeon feel like places that could exist rather than haphazard worn of corridors. Starfield's procedural generated pirate bases need a logical layout that feels like a cohesive whole rather than a random collection of rooms arbitrarily stuck together. There's also the risk that Starfield's procedural generation might blur together after a while, lacking the uniqueness fans loved with Skyrim and Fallout 4's dungeons. Only time will tell if Bethesda finds a way to make it work. Yeah, it's going to be a mixture of handmade stuff and then also the procedural generation. My fear with Starfield primarily, though, is just that it seems like Todd Howard has grown bored with some of this stuff. And so he's looking for a way to make it more interesting. So I think he's gotten a little bored, and each time he comes out with a new game, they really try to shake it up and do something a little bit different. So Fallout 4, for example, brought with it the voiceless or the voiced protagonist, and it also brought with it a different approach to the main campaign. They tried to take it more seriously and approach it as a much more narrative game than previous ones, tying the player's experience directly in with it. So it was an interesting experiment, but I just don't think it worked fully. And then, of course, Fallout 76 experimented with bringing multiplayer, and then Starfield is bringing all of this procedural tech, and it could pay off really, really well, but it might also not. Let's see this video from Time Player, why Starfield's procedural generation won't suck. Not that the Field of Stars is so
When
vast.
the first 15 minutes of Starfield gameplay premiered at the Bethesda Showcase in 2022, I was quite skeptical of it.
Attaboy.
Sure, the gameplay was a bit rough around the edges,
Which, to be fair, they have greatly improved. I've said this from the start, that what we saw this summer looked way better than what we got originally, which is good. It shows they're improving.
gunplay looked lackluster, and even the planet that was showcased at the time seemed awfully barren. However, I was more questioning the level of ambition Bethesda was describing during its reveal. 1,000 planets, all seemingly explorable inch by inch. I constantly wondered, how could this even be possible? The staple mark of Bethesda games are the level of detail their worlds have, not only in the environments, but the interactions with those environments, and the people of those environments as well. The exploration nature of Bethesda games are what make them so damn memorable, and products that you can practically play for hundreds of hours without them ever feeling repetitive.
I know it's pedantic, but I would say that they certainly do start to feel very repetitive, but it's still unique enough that it's fun. With something like Skyrim, it really is just such a massive game that you can play it for 150 hours and still be discovering new stuff. It's just that big of a game. Fallout 4, I think, mixes in a lot of that procedural questing a lot more aggressively than Skyrim did. And that's why, like, a settlement needs your help became such a meme when that game came out, like that it just became a joke that, oh, another settlement needs my help, huh? Oh, shocker, you know. So hopefully they've mellowed it out since that became a meme, but we'll see.
Starfield, being a game with over seemingly 1,000 planets, did raise some very valid questions. How can it be so deep while being so wide? Just 2 weeks ago from
I've been asking myself that question for years. How is it so deep and so wide at the same time, baby? It's a real question. I mean, I think the fear with any game that does procedural stuff is if they're wondering if it's going to be as deep, or as rather wide as an ocean, but as deep as a puddle. That's what you're worried about. Like, it can look massive with this crazy scale, but again, if there's no depth, if there's no like meat on the bone, if there's nothing really fun or engaging other than go to this planet to collect iron, and go to that planet to collect ice, and go to that planet to collect uranium, and go to this planet to collect methane. Like, if that's all the game really boils down to, it's going to be as wide as an ocean, but as deep as a puddle, and it just won't be that engaging. I'm sure they've thought about this and they're concerned about it. The question is just whether or not they actually can overcome that difficulty.
From today, we had the Starfield Direct. I watched it, live in fact, because as much as I was doubting the ambition of Bethesda Maryland, I still wanted to see more about this project. And I am glad I did, because this is the only showcase of an upcoming video game that has left me this impressed to this degree.
To the same level of like that guy that with No Man's Sky. It's like, this is the first time I felt a human connection. I was so cringe, dude. Again, if you guys haven't seen that live clip, go look on the Luke Stevens live channel and look at that, like, No Man's Sky hype, dude. That was something else. I've been in this industry for 2 years, and watching Sean Murray describe No Man's Sky was the first time I felt a human connection.
Seriously, it was very well done, and I can admit now that I am indeed excited for Starfield. But in
I'm okay with excited. But hype makes you stupid.
my opinion, the biggest piece of information we acquired from this showcase, the information that soothes my nerves a little, was the explanation on how the procedural generation system is going to work. When you hear of procedural generation, you probably think of Minecraft or No Man's Sky, a system that randomly generates terrain and environment around you according to set parameters. And while the system is acceptable, it does throw away a great extent of handcrafted detail in exchange for scale. For example, No Man's Sky does have trillions of planets, but how many times do you have to visit planets before everything just starts to blend in and look the same?
Yes. Big question. Like, there's only so much procedural stuff you can do. And Todd has mentioned over 1,000 planets, but there's only, I believe they said 3 or 4 like large cities in the game. So there's only 3 or 4 places where you're going to be going to do most of the like trading, and a lot of the main story quests I'm sure will hub or spiral based off of that. And if each city is on a separate planet, okay, 4 out of over 1,000 that have a lot of like very specific handcrafted content. Maybe you add a lot of extra side quests and stuff, and you say, okay, maybe for 100 they've really customized these planets a lot. That still leaves over 900, so probably 90+% of the game's planets and explorable area is just procedural stuff. And they said that there are many planets that are just totally empty. And some people are like, oh, good for mods. Maybe. What are you going to do with mods on there? Build like race tracks for vehicles that aren't in the game? Like, what are you going to do with a planet to screw around on? I don't know. Modders will figure it out. But a lot of those planets, no doubt, are going to be used for resource collection. It's going to be things like, oh, this planet is really heavy in iron and copper. So you're going to go there, use your mining beam, just like in No Man's Sky, collect iron and copper, and then get in your ship and leave. And that's all the planet is good for. And whether the planet looks pretty or not, I think eventually players start to get a little tired of that unless they found some way to shake it up. My question is just whether or not, like, if they found a way to make those planets really interesting, I would have thought that they would have come up with a way to communicate that. Maybe they're just keeping it all secret and we're going to be super blown away when the game launches. But as of right now, we don't know what they're doing on those empty planets to make them interesting or worth going to other than collecting resources. And that concerns me because, again, that's over 90% of the game's explorable area. If something like Skyrim had 90% of its map, or maybe just to be directly comparable, because it is bigger. If we said that Skyrim had another huge section of the map that made, Skyrim itself, that map was only 10% of the total explorable area they then gave to you, but all of the other places were just for resource collection and they were just empty. I don't think many people would spend much time exploring them because it would just be like, what's the point? Like, I got some materials to collect, but that's about it.
See, this is possibly the largest problem I had with No Man's Sky, is that after a few hours of exploration, everything just became the same. It became boring and dull. And no disrespect, but no matter how much the game has improved, that perception still hasn't really modified for me. This is why when Starfield was announced with 1,000 planets, it was a little disheartening to me. But after learning more about it, thanks to the
Disheartening, and that means your brain was working. That's very good.
recent showcase, I do share a great extent more optimism on the way this system will work.
That's okay. I mean, again, optimism is okay. It's where we start to get irrational that we have a problem. But if you're just optimistic, that's fine. I'm also optimistic.
Bethesda knows that you won't be able to visit all 1,000 planets in your playthrough. Sure.
Oh, I'm gonna do it. We're gonna do it. It's gonna be a section in the critique where I'm like, nobody could possibly go to all 1,000 planets just for a single YouTube video, right? Wrong. We're doing it. And then we're gonna do it. We're gonna do it. We're going to go to every single planet, and I think a good amount of people are probably going to do it if they don't get so sick and tired that they give up by then. So buckle up. I'm doing it.
Or the very few minority who are extremely dedicated may achieve that, but the vast majority of players will put in 60 to 100 hours and call it a day for their first playthrough. Now, how many planets would you probably visit in those hours? Well, even if you focus highly on exploration, you probably won't top over 100 to 150. This is why Bethesda uses an interesting concept of procedurally generating environment with handcrafted points of interest.
Yeah, I think this is also just important to stress, though. Like, just think about 1,000 planets and think about the time invested in a planet worth exploring. If there is a planet with interesting things to find and see, I think an hour spent on that planet is not actually very much. I mean, maybe you say 30 minutes, but an hour exploring a planet is really not a lot of time. You don't have to have that much content on a planet to justify an hour of gameplay time. And so like if they really achieved their goal and if they really did a good job with this, you're talking about a game that probably requires 1,000 hours to get through, because in theory every planet would be worth exploring and worth checking out and would have a lot of stuff. I don't think anybody really expects that, which is more broadly the point. Is I think they probably put a lot of effort into a few planets, and then all the others are stuff like what you're seeing now, with maybe a point of interest that generates when you land, and then everything else is just big, open, and expansive, which again might be totally fine. It might be a really novel way of doing this to kind of get around the problem of populating an entire planet, but we're just gonna have to wait and see.
So basically, every planet does have its own parameters. For example, in this screenshot, we can identify the type of surface, the gravity, the atmosphere, the fauna, flora, and even water. And these parameters will apply to everyone's game. As you land, a 1 kilometer tile will be generated around your area, set to the seed everyone will share. So everyone's planets will look the same.
Yeah, if you land on that particular point. I don't know how fine-tuned the landing zones are. Like if it's based, they showed one, maybe he'll show it. They showed like a screen cap of the screen when you're landing, when you're selecting your landing location. It doesn't really show it here, but it looked like it was broken down in a grid. Maybe I can just pull it up in like the Todd Howard bit, but I mean, kind of like this, but basically like you can see how each of these areas are marked with certain resources. So if you selected, oh, I want to land here, I don't know if it snaps you over to a spot where they've already set for landing zones, or if you can pick literally any point on this and then it generates the seed based on that. I'm not sure. Word of your desert, thank you for the 5. Very generous. Thank you, my friend. First super chat as well.
Word Ear Desert 1 super chatted $4.99. I was wondering if you're going to check out the new Total War Pharaoh game that takes place in Egypt.
I think so. I'm all about Egypt stuff, so yeah, I'm pretty sure. I actually have it on my Steam wish list already, so yeah, I'm keeping an eye on it for sure. But I mean, you can see here, you can select landing target with A. You just select a spot, and then it looks like he's got something built here, so you could snap to that and go there. But I'm wondering if like you set a landing target for over here and it just goes from there. I'm not sure. Again, there's just a lot of like questions with all of it.
But what won't look the same are the points of interest inside of those planets. This short little clip that was presented during the direct confused a vast amount of people. Everyone wondered, will the points of interest look different on that part of the planet every time I visit it? And the answer to that is no. What they were trying to portray was how everyone's game's points of interest will be different. Bethesda has roughly created over probably at least a few hundred different and unique points of interest. So
over probably at least a few hundred. I mean, I would be shocked if it was less than that. I would agree. Like, they're trying to populate 1,000 planets with interesting stuff. You'd think they'd create at least like a few hundred points of interest to spawn. But what he's saying, again, just to be clear, is like when you land on a planet like this, like say we land there, right here on the corner in this little divot. If they have it set to generate one outpost, one mercenary camp, and then a monster, let's just say that, what they'll do is they will land you there using the seed for the planet, and they generate the kilometer around you. And then they go in and they drop procedurally where the outpost is, where the bandits are, where the monster is, all that. But that's placed randomly around. So when you're doing like a guide or something, if you're trying to watch a tutorial of where to get this good piece of armor or whatever, like everybody does, you're gonna see it's like, go to this planet and land in roughly this area and look around for a bandit camp. It should be within a kilometer. You'll find it somewhere and then you can go. It could actually lead to interesting moments where like there is no just quick dart to this spot to grab this item and leave. It's like, no, it's going to be somewhere different every single time. Even with quests, it's not going to be like there's a clear objective marker. Hopefully they do this. Hopefully they have it set so like you go to an area of the planet and they give you like a big circle here and they're like, yeah, last contact with this person we need to trade with or kidnap or whatever is in this area. And so you land smack dab in the middle and then you look for them. That's what I would hope we get, but time will tell.
Every time you land on a new planet, the game will analyze what type of planet it is, if it is barren, if it has water, if it is already booming with civilization, if it has alien life, etc, etc. And then according to those set parameters, the system will pull 1 or 2 points of interest out of the large library and place them randomly onto the map for you to see.
I mean, I think it's a little more limited just because you have restrictions with, you know, the type of planet. Icy objects or icy outposts are not going to go onto desert planets and stuff like that. This is funny that we have palm trees, like straight up palm trees. I mean, that's just funny to me. Yeah, on an alien planet, what are the odds?
This is a great system because it enables Bethesda to show the player what they want you to see while also retaining that sense of scale and vastness. Now, it was a relief to hear about the way this system would work, and it definitely did get rid of a large worry of mine. But there was another question that introduced itself after this, and it was, what if it starts to feel too artificial? What if every time you land on a planet, the game overwhelms you with its points of interest? There's always dozens of bases around you and too much stuff to see. Wouldn't that remove the feeling of discovery and that needed emptiness of a planet, especially ones in distant solar systems?
I mean, maybe for some people who are getting really, really immersed, but I mean, again, I think it's just important to remember that this is a video game first and a space simulator second. Other games like maybe Star Citizen, they lean more into simulation than they do video games, so they can get away with doing some of that stuff where you just have big empty planets, and that's kind of the point because they're planets and they're empty. Whereas Starfield is trying to be a fun video game, so I think they're going to gamify a lot of this stuff.
It was worrisome to me as well that it may be too populated, but during a recent interview with Todd, he also clarified this question.
You know, I think it is a moment when you land on some of these barren planets. And again, we will generate certain things for you to find on them. But if you look at a planet, you see the resources, it has things you want. There is, I love the Buzz Aldrin quote, the magnificent desolation. I think there's a certain beauty to landing on those and feeling I'm one of the only.
Yeah, I specifically like this shot. I just like that shot. And I agree. Like it's one of these things that's just tricky. It's like big empty planets out in space are accurate. If you're trying to stick to the theme, that's going to be there for sure. Whether that makes for a fun video game is another question, you know, and that's kind of the main point is just they have to be clear with players and they have to communicate like, listen, some of the places you go to explore, there's just not going to really be anything on them. And in those moments, take in the sights and then move on. That's okay. And I think as long as they can communicate that, that's fine. There's going to be a lot of players who like land on this planet and then just try to run for miles and see if they can discover something interesting. And I would guess that there's a good number of players that waste a good amount of time doing that. I mean, I'm going to be one of them. What I'm going to do is we're going to do a little testy test where we probably do like a 6-7 hour stream. And all I'm doing is running straight. because I really want to know if you can actually circumnavigate these, or if it is the case that, like, with some of these planets, if you land here and then you run all the way across, do you actually reach water? Like, will you actually reach the end of the continent? You know, they might have some of these broken up in ways that you can't circumnavigate no matter how much you try. Like, they build them in little cells that are broken up by water or really high mountains that you can't scale. I don't know. You want me to mod for 7 hours straight? Yes. No, I mean, honestly, I might not even be sitting in the chair for most of it. I might just put like a weight on the W key and just run straight. We'll go find an ice planet or something. And I don't know. We'll just see if we can circumnavigate the whole thing. As, you know, for science.
The only people or the only person to ever visit this planet. So it's a difficult design thing. If you add too many things, if it's generating too many abandoned bases or towers or things to find, it starts feeling too gamey in some of those locations. So I think we've dialed that in pretty well.
So, yes, if you land on a barren, isolated moon far away from civilization, you probably won't see human bases in the area, and the game would rather prioritize points of interest created by nature itself. However, this system is also not flawless whatsoever. It has some giant limitations. In fact, this is the exact reason why rovers and atmospheric flight are not present in the game, because the system...
I'm so glad that me whining about this has, like, allowed people to talk about it. It's not just me. A lot of people have talked about this, to be clear. And I think it's just because it's such a seeming glaring oversight. I know, maybe not oversight. I don't think oversight is the right word. Omission. It's a glaring omission because it seems so bizarre that you can go land on a planet and then there is no way to travel quickly across said planet and explore it. It just doesn't make any sense. Even, like, give me a freaking Cybertruck. That's going to be one of the mods. You better believe it. There's going to be like a Cybertruck that you can drop from your ship and you can drive that around the planet, and then you can go load stuff into the front trunk, the frunk of the car, and then into the bed of the pickup, drive it back to your ship and unload so you can carry more items. Like, no doubt that's going to be a mod. And it's going to be a mod, no doubt, because it is such a clear and obvious thing to have in the game. I saw some people talking, you know, on the Discord and things, and they left very interesting and like very well thought out comments and stuff about this, where they said, I don't think it's that big of a deal, and some planets the terrain wouldn't allow you to have like a rover. One guy was saying, I don't think it's a big deal because they're going for a harder sci-fi and rovers are not that viable, and in-planet flight is not viable because the ships are specialized for space travel, not in-planet flight. I'm like, okay. I mean, we see it landing in atmosphere. It comes in and lands flat, and then it takes off and flies. So there's no reason it couldn't just do that and then land somewhere else on a different landing pad, but whatever. It's all just like ad hoc rationalizations and people trying to justify this away because they're trying to find some way to explain it away. But for me, it's just a big omission, and it's a bit of a bummer. The game might still be great, but at this point, I also think adding those as mods might not be that helpful because the game has been balanced and all of these items and places of interest have been generated based on you staying pretty close, based on you being on foot. So with a vehicle, it's going to be very, very different.
System cannot generate new tiles that contain such detail and handcrafted content at such high speeds, especially if you're on a spaceship going hundreds of knots above the planet's surface.
I mean, it might not even necessarily be about the generation of the tiles, because I think that there is a way to just, I mean, all of these other games, space games have done this, where you just have the seed and then it generates it based off of a master seed that's generated by the devs before the game launches. And then everything is built off of that, so it's not having to generate anything really itself. It's just reading the seed and then applying things based on that rule set that they've established. So I don't think it's that. I think it's probably more related to the RAM restrictions of something like the Series S. Scandal, right? That's my little conspiracy theory. I think with this being exclusive to Xbox especially, they could not afford to have crappy Series S performance. And I don't think they probably can keep miles and miles of planet surfaces in the 8 gigs of RAM that the Series S has available. I'm not sure that they'd be able to manage it. So that's my little conspiracy theory. I think this all might just go back to the Series S, which would be really, really, really funny. I'm sure in an open world, or I'm sure in a world where galactic travel is possible, rovers would be far more advanced than what we currently have, surely. That's kind of where I'm at. I'm like, dude, you're flying a spaceship. You're like a singular individual who owns a spaceship. So I think you could afford a rover, and they probably have managed to come up with a rover that can go over some rocky surfaces okay. So I think arguing they didn't include it. Like, the thing that's so stupid about all of this is that they say, like, they're saying all of this stuff and implying that that's why it's not in the game, right? Oh, I think it's good, like, it's not in the game, and it's not in the game because they're not going for this type of sci-fi. They're going for something more grounded. Rovers are just, it wouldn't technologically line up, blah, blah, blah. They go through all of this stuff. And it's like, okay, follow that through. Are you really suggesting that they were sitting down to design Starfield and then they all came together and were like, well, we have like prototypes of the rover's design. It's really cool. It feels really good to drive in. And then the writers come in and sit down and are like, guys, we're going for a more grounded thing. Narratively, they don't have rovers in this universe. So even though that would make the gameplay experience a lot better and would make things more fun and easy to explore the planets, we got to cut them because narratively it just doesn't work. You don't think Todd would have been like, no, we need these for sake of the gameplay, so change the story. Like, change it so, yeah, we have rovers now. Just tweak that in the lore that we're creating to make it work. Clearly, they didn't avoid or didn't lose rovers and things and in atmosphere flight for narrative reasons. They lost it because they couldn't get it working technologically, or because honestly they do believe that the game is better without them. I think that is something that needs to be demonstrated because all of these other games have had these as a staple. So it seems really odd that Starfield doesn't have them, but you know, we shall see. Strider, thank you also for re-upping your membership. My goodness, love to see it. I think they probably designed it around finding a couple of neat geographical locations, coastline, mountain, etc., and checking out those areas only. I agree. I think they only really expect you to like go and find 2 to 3, maybe 4 things on each planet before moving on, except for big planets where they've handcrafted and placed a lot of stuff. That's my understanding, because you hear Todd, he says, like, when you land on a planet, we'll place some points of interest for you to explore. And I'm like, again, 1,000 planets, if they're expecting the average player to find and explore maybe 100 of them or 200 of them, I mean, that's still like at like a 50-hour run through, which is a lot. Like 100 hours is a ton, so much so that a lot of people don't even want to play a game that's 100 hours long. If you're talking about like half an hour on each planet, setting aside extra time you're spending in cities talking with characters and doing main story stuff that isn't just exploring a planet. If you spend half an hour exploring 100 planets, that's 50 hours of gameplay. Right there. Just 100 planets. Only for 30 minutes from when you land to when you leave. So I don't think that they're filling these planets up with just a ton of stuff, you know, because I don't think that's what they really want you to do. I don't think they want you to spend 10 hours exploring one planet.
But the system in the end allows for more detail than ever, especially comparing it to other space games where exploration becomes dull only after a few hours. Furthermore, I saw more skepticism on how the areas which you will land in work. Will it only be explorable inside of that 1 kilometer tile the game generates, or will the game generate tiles as you walk? Now, this is something that has only been vaguely clarified by Todd, and that was in an interview over a year ago. Hear this.
Well, the first when we did it was, how are we going to render a planet, like pull it off for the player? Like, can we? Or do we have to sort of do it where you can't land on all of them, where you're landing in a very controlled, small world space that we, you know, kind of craft, and you would have a very limited set of those. Mm-hmm. You go back to tone, like, well, that's probably the wrong tone. And how can we say yes? Like, I want to land on that ice ball. So we started the game.
So I do believe
Yeah, it's one of the things Todd has said a lot is how do you say yes? If you go back to the videos of them designing like Oblivion, I'm sorry, Todd, I did you dirty with that screen stuff. If you Todd's face when the reviews for Starfield come in and it's buggy and broken. So like he said this a lot going even back to Oblivion, where it was like, how do we say yes? How do we give the players the option to do what they want to do? And I can respect that. It's noble to want to give players as much freedom to do as much as they want. You know, I think that that's a good philosophy to have. And so if he's, you know, discussing how he's generating this and saying, yeah, we don't like being super restrictive, you have to wonder, okay, so you aren't going to be super restrictive. You're going to let us just run. How does that work with the procedural generation stuff, which is what he's referencing?
Planets will be kind of endless. As you walk towards the edge of one tile, the game will generate a new tile in the background, which once again gives further reasoning why land vehicles and atmospheric flight on the game are not present, because it would overload the system. Even more evidence of this actually comes out of a Reddit post made by Bet Stranger. As you can see in the screenshot taken from the direct, the player is 1,200 meters away from the ship, meaning 1.2 kilometers, which is greater than the 1 kilometer tile Todd said. So it is evident that no, you will not be limited to explore around your ship.
Yeah, I mean, as far as we can tell, they might also do stuff where they set it like some arbitrary number, like you can't explore more than 5 kilometers away from your ship, and they just give you a pop-up, you need to turn back, you're too far from your ship, or something like that. Just something. Or you can fast travel back to your ship, whatever it may be. I still think there's something like that, because again, I don't think that they're going to let you just circumnavigate a planet. I don't think that they have the tech for that. It doesn't sound like it. So we shall see. We'll see.
Is truly all great.
Also, David, thank you. Knocking on the door for almost 1 year. Might have to ask for a raise in 2 months. Long JK, keep the grind. Elixir. David Bryan, yeah, 10 months. Gee whiz, that's crazy. 10 months, my goodness. Well, congratulations. That's fantastic. Much love.
But even after all of this,
possibly a radio connection to your ship. Yeah, they're going to do something like that. It's going to be like your life support systems are dropping. You need to get back to your ship, or, you know, if something goes wrong, you won't be able to be saved by your crew. Like they'll say something, you know, your comm link is being severed if you get farther away from your ship. So they'll do something to keep you close.
Explore around your ship. This is truly all great. But even after all of this very positive information, I still have one small worry about the system, and that involves how many handcrafted points of interest has Bethesda really created. Now, as I said before, that the number of points of interest will range in probably at least a few hundred, but that is my own speculation. Bethesda has actually not said anything about the number of points of interest they have made. And if this number falls too short, such as only in the few dozens, then that is a giant problem. Because if the same points of interest begin to repeat only after visiting a dozen or so planets, that can be quite immersion breaking. For example, imagine if you saw the exact same crashed capital ship that you just saw a few hours earlier, but on a different planet. Hopefully, Bethesda is smart about this and has created a number where even when some points of interest begin to repeat and show up again, the player won't even notice it because it's been so long since they saw that exact same point of interest.
Yeah, I mean, that's the no-brainer, is just, oh, if we have 50 points of interest, we just loop back on it. So you don't see example A until you've gotten all the way through Z, and then you go and you see A again. But again, I mean, that it's a little more nuanced than that, because like on certain planets, there's only going to be certain types of encounters or certain types of landmarks or points of interest. And beyond this, it's just how many of these points of interest are actually like worth exploring the planet for. You know, that's something we just don't know yet.
So anything above 300 would be a good amount. Furthermore, modders can take advantage of the system and pump out their own points of interest for the player to see, adding to the pool of the number. Other than that, the information that we've gotten during the direct and after does earn the procedural generation system a sense of optimism, and I genuinely do think that this procedural system will work extraordinarily well after looking at this design behind it. Can this video come back to haunt me? Of course, but Starfield has genuinely reignited that spark of excitement for video games that I've not felt ever since forever.
Ever since forever. Well, and what I would say to you, my friend, for one, very good video. So I'm impressed, Time Player. Well done. We will keep an eye on you and your stuff. Secondly, you seem to be approaching it critically. I didn't hear a whole lot of speculation. Pretty much everything that he threw out is backed by like actual evidence and things that he's seen or heard from Todd and the team. So like, for example, the 1200 meters thing. Oh, so there's something being like something in the game's memory that's over a kilometer away. So we're not just limited by a single kilometer, which is good. So I don't get the sense that he's wildly speculating or being totally irrational and unreasonable. I think this is a pretty level-headed take. And if this is something that really captivates you and interests you, that's awesome. I think approaching it skeptically is always the best bet, but when you approach something skeptically, you can also end up at the conclusion that this is worthy of excitement. And I would say I'm very intrigued by Starfield. I'm personally, the reason, like, if this was coming from a studio like, I don't know, just like a really solid, well-known studio that doesn't have a lot of baggage, then I'd be like, okay, yeah, no, this looks really, really promising, and I'm excited to see what this is like. But because it's coming from a studio that just scammed us a few years ago, I'm not crossing that threshold. I'm not going past that to, oh yeah, excited, I'm going to give them my money day one. I'm much more cautious. And I will wait to be, like, they have to earn my buy. They're not going to just get it because they showed something that looks kind of cool. That's my personal stance on that. It just blows my mind that everybody is just so willing to forgive and move on from when they got scammed just a little while ago. Like, it's amazing to me. He took my thing.